So the Alien film franchise has been going strong for nearly 50 years. Kind of
Sheesh.
crazy to think about. Almost 50 years coming up in
Wow.
2029. It'll be 50 years old. And Alien Romulus now represents the seventh overall feature film in this franchise. If you count the crossover films with the Predator movies, it would make it the ninth overall. I don't know if we're going to count those. They are in their own sort of plane of existence, but with the proper traditional Alien franchise, this is the seventh feature film, but it's also the first feature film under the new regime of 20th Century Studios ever since they were purchased and acquired by Disney a few years ago. And when Disney acquired 20th Century Fox, they certainly stated their intent and their plans to make more Alien movies. And they announced at the 2019 CinemaCon presentation that they were going to develop more movies. What's also interesting is that currently a show is also in development from showrunner Noah Hawley that's going to be premiering at some point on FX, which is going to be, I believe, a prequel to even Prometheus, which was already a prequel
Mm.
to the original Alien movie. But this is sort of a standalone feature film, which technically takes place between the first Alien movie and then also its sequel, Aliens. And so it's technically a midquel or whatever the term or categorization is. I don't know. We have all sorts of weird terminology these days, but again, this is the latest Alien feature film, but it's been the first one in 7 years since director Ridley Scott last took on this franchise. This one, however, is directed by Fede Alvarez, who's been directing horror and thriller films for a little bit over a decade now. He is most known for his work on the Evil Dead reimagining that came out in 2013. He also directed Don't Breathe, which was a breakout success in 2016, and now he's following up again here with this brand new Alien film that we got a chance to go check out this past weekend in movie theaters. And so with all of that out the way, man, I will pass it over to you. What do you think about Alien Romulus?
First and foremost, I was super extra mega excited for Alien Romulus. Definitely one of my most anticipated films of the year. I love the Alien franchise. Aliens is one of my favorite movies. And man, when I heard Fede Alvarez was stepping into the director's chair to take over an Alien film, I was like, wow, another pretty darn good director to come in and touch this Alien franchise. And again, like you said, given Don't Breathe and given Evil Dead, I was just super excited to see what Fede Alvarez could do with this movie. And after watching Alien Romulus, I had a pretty good time. This movie is definitely, we've been getting a lot of love letters lately. That's just how, I don't know, like cinema is right now. Everything is a franchise love letter, and that's what this feels like as well. But that doesn't make it a perfect love letter, I think, either, because there are some things I think in this movie that feel uh, uh not counterintuitive, but I think I just wish they went into a different direction in this film. But Alien Romulus is it's a ton of fun. It's shot beautifully. And you know, like you said, it being taking place between Alien 1 and Alien 2, it definitely has all the DNA of every alien kind of film ever. If you name an alien film, there's something in this movie that kind of references any alien film. So a lot of people might you might hear a lot of people talk about the fan service in this movie or things like that. The fan service parts are things I like. Actually, I actually had a really good time recalling some of that stuff and saying, you know what, I am a fan of this franchise. I understood that reference. I get that thing here. That stuff was definitely fun for me. What they do to take you into, I think, a different, somewhat different situation in Alien Romulus is kind of a different ship, and they make it a horror film again, similar to that first Alien movie. I think they kind of put our characters in situations where you're like, oh my god, I can't believe you're here. What are you going to do to get out of this? And all of that stuff is a ton of fun. The only thing I feel like I have to take away from it a bit for me is that same idea, though, is that like it's like, oh, this is Alien, or you know, it feels like a lot of the same beats being hit here, instead of maybe potentially going in a slightly different direction. Almost everything that happens in this film kind of feels like Alien 2024. Like, how can we do this slightly differently, or how can we do this and make it look better? How can we do this and move the camera different? And yeah, I think coming into this, I was just hoping we would spin it some other way. I was hoping we would do something a little different, almost similar to how I guess Alien Covenant and Prometheus was. Those were movies that were like, whoa, y'all are swinging for the fences, but I'm glad y'all are doing this. I'm very happy y'all are swinging for the fences. And so Alien Romulus to me doesn't make the swing I think that I was hoping that it would make. But that being said, I absolutely enjoy this film a lot, though. Again, it's beautiful. I love the tension that's being built. The acting, I think, is superb. Kaylee Spaney, David Johnson. I mean, everybody, I think, is doing a pretty good job here. I looked over, people was grabbing their seats, covering their faces. Like, it was actually a very fun theatrical experience, and I appreciate it for that. So shout out to Fede Alvarez. He still did a tremendous job. I like this movie a ton, and honestly can't wait to see what else they do, because now I do think, no spoiler, but giving, how it kind of ended, I do feel like, okay, maybe there is maybe something else coming after this in a different direction. Like you said, there's a TV show. We'll see what happens when all this comes about. But I'm still very, very happy with what we got in Alien Romulus, and it's definitely, at least so far, probably one of my one of the more favorite horror films of the year for me.
I too am a huge, huge fan of the Alien franchise. Those first two films, Alien in 1979 and Aliens in 1986, are seminal, transformative movies for me personally. Alien more so from the horror standpoint and what it specifically did for science fiction films and how it just reshaped what a science fiction thriller horror movie could even look like. And it's just amazing that at that time, Ridley Scott, really, really young director, basically made that movie because he was distraught over seeing Star Wars and kind of in a mode of depression, like, oh my goodness, this is what movies can be capable of. But it's great that he felt that way because he kind of made the perfect marriage between a Star Wars movie and Jaws almost, and I think he really looked to his peers at that time to create this new amalgamation of a film that really hadn't been done before. And then of course Jim Cameron with Aliens in 1986, just going
Mm-hmm.
with the full blown action sci-fi epic more so than being a horror movie, and then taking it to a different direction was just incredible and one of the greatest sequels ever made. And the rest of the franchise has taken so many different shapes. It's been really one of the more interesting franchises to follow throughout its existence. And so once Alien Romulus was announced, I'm like, okay, I'm here for it. The previous entry, Alien Covenant, is not one of my more favorite entries in the franchise. There's some really, really gnarly stuff in it. It's one of the more violent entries. But I was curious to see what a new director would do, considering Ridley Scott had returned after all those years and made those two previous movies. And I gotta say, Alien Romulus was a damn good time. I had so much fun with this film. I thought it was pretty fantastic across the board in terms of a horror movie and in terms of even a science fiction movie. As an alien movie, it's not the best in this particular category. It's not the best of the franchise by any means, but it may be my most favorite Alien sequel we've gotten in a long, long time. Honestly,
Mm-hmm.
maybe since Aliens in 1986. And I really do appreciate Prometheus, specifically what they were trying to do and introducing some big, heady concepts and ideas and being more thoughtful and contemplative about this whole thing. That was a really shocking movie just because of what they did there, but I appreciated it. And then Alien Covenant was a bit of a step back, but I appreciate it for its own merits. But this is just kind of getting back to form and getting back to the roots of the franchise. And I think Fede Alvarez was very keen on doing so. And I think he
Mm-hmm.
accomplished that because all the elements that you would want out of an Alien movie are present here. Not only does it make connections and references to literally every other Alien movie in the franchise in some capacity, I do think that at certain moments it elevates and reaches some incredibly high highs. Some of the sequences, specifically in the last 45 minutes of the movie, are some of the most tension filled, suspenseful sequences I've seen in any movie this year so far. There were some incredibly ingenious things that were done in the space station. And even as a
Mm-hmm.
spacecraft movie, this excels above a lot of contemporary films just in that particular idea alone, because you are working within a very limited space in terms of just where characters can move and what they have access to, the close quarters scenario of it all. There were some really, really ingenious sequences, specifically in the back half of the movie, that just take it to another level for me. I think that the first 30 or so minutes kind of struggle to get out of the gate. It's not the most engaging material that you've probably seen. They do a really good job with Kaylee Spaney's character, Rain. They do a really good job with David Johnson's character. Everybody else, I don't know if we necessarily cared for them as much as we probably should have, because you ultimately know
Mm-hmm.
that bodies are going to fucking fly in this movie. That's going
Yeah.
to be the whole premise. And I do think that they could have done maybe a little bit better with just how they demonstrated how we're supposed to care about these characters. But once it gets going, it's
Mm-hmm.
relentless. It's completely suspenseful. it is very intense, and it does certainly utilize the xenomorph as the creature in a very, very amazing way, because we have to think about with these movies, the xenomorph is not something that you see all the time. The xenomorph is often reserved for dark spaces and dark corners and ceilings. Like it's not a particular creature that's just out there and you can examine every piece of its facade or of its body. The mystery behind the xenomorph is why it is one of the greatest monster creatures ever created. And I think that we got back to the essence of why the xenomorph is so terrifying in this
Yeah.
movie, because we don't see him a ton. We just don't see that particular creature all that much in the film. And they built the suspense, and ultimately you see all of the stuff that goes down, the stuff that's particularly attached to this lore and this mythology, the face huggers, like all of that stuff is present in there. And it's really, really, it's terrific. On the other hand, there is one thing in particular that I'm not a fan of, and I can't get into it because it would be a spoiler, but I'll just say that the place of this film being in between the first and the second, they introduce a story element with a character that
Yeah.
returns, and it
Mhm.
just doesn't work because of reasons. I just can't get into it really to spoil it. But there are certain things that they do that we've seen in other franchise films, in terms of bringing back characters that maybe weren't available for whatever reason at the time, and it just doesn't work because it just doesn't feel as believable as it should. That was like my one bit criticism that kind of took me out of the experience. But
Yeah.
outside of that, Kaylee Spaney, she's going to be incredibly famous really, really soon here. She is a star in the making. I
Yeah.
first noticed her in Priscilla from last year. She was incredible in that. Civil War this year, she did an amazing job in that film. And now doing Alien Romulus, this big franchise picture, she is certainly making movements within her choices that she's making in a very strategic and I think in an intelligent way. And she's going to be a huge star really soon. And then also David Johnson, incredible in this movie. He's playing sort of an android like character. And so what he has to do is very different than the rest of the cast. And he excels at it. And he has some of the best moments, some funny lines here and there, some great action beats, some great suspense beats, all stuff that I really liked. And I will just mention one more thing before I close out. They take a really, really different swing here at the end of the movie that did not see coming. That's either going to work for people or it's not, because it goes in a direction that is unplanned and you can't
Hmm.
necessarily predict. It does sort of tie into previous movies. It feels like Prometheus and even Alien Resurrection in terms of what they were trying to do here, but it is
Yeah.
it is ballsy because it's different, and it's different in so many ways that I can't really get into, but you'll have to see it for yourself. But really, really fantastic job, I think, on the part of Fede Alvarez and what they did here. I really loved Alien Romulus. This movie has done extraordinarily well at the box office. It led the domestic opening weekend box office, made $41.5 million. Finally dethroned Deadpool and Wolverine from the top spot at the box office. And globally, I think it made like over $108 million, something crazy like that. So
Mm.
it's doing very,
Fire.
very well. And there will be more, I think, just due to the case of this. But what's also interesting is that Disney's biggest films thus far this year, these are the four: Inside Out 2, Deadpool and Wolverine, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and now Alien Romulus. Three of those movies are 20th Century Fox properties. And it's been like 6 years almost since I think it's been really important to them to really integrate the 20th Century Fox properties into their whole strategy. It felt like that there were a
Hmm.
few years there where it's like it kind of feels like it's going to waste. Like, what are we doing with these 20th
Yeah.
Century Fox properties? You paid 71 point whatever $billion. That's a lot of money. And we're not really seeing them utilized in new and interesting ways. And I was even really upset about what they did with Prey and how that went straight to Hulu instead of
Mm-hmm.
being a theatrical play. Now, you just fast forward a couple of years, Deadpool and Wolverine just surpassed $1.1 billion, highest grossing rated R movie of all time. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, it's not the highest grossing in the franchise, but as a semi prequel reboot sort of the franchise, I think did a really healthy box office. Now this is coming out of the gate, the second highest opening for an Alien film in the franchise. Feels like Disney is doing really well, especially considering the pretty terrible year that they had last year. They had to rebound
Hmm.
in a big way. What do you think about just like some of these properties now kind of being some of the bigger films of the year, especially considering like some of the conversations we've had for the past few months about box office performance and some of the concerns, and now ultimately seeing that it does feel like things are at least in a little bit more of a healthy state?
I also couldn't have guessed that two of Disney's biggest movies of the year. we're gonna be rated R. It's like, whoa, Disney, what's going on here? What is this? What are these properties? What's happening? I think maybe they're finally, maybe they're finally getting together and understanding what they have, or maybe they just didn't want to rush, into the Foxness, the Fox things that they had. Because still, I would say, still from a streaming perspective, it still doesn't feel like they're doing anything with their Fox stuff. It's like, all right, we need y'all to. There's still so much in the vault. You open Disney Plus, it's like, why isn't this on here? Why isn't this on here? So I think they're still sifting through that stuff, and maybe they just don't want to show their hand all at once either. But now it's like, yeah, it's time. Like, what are we doing? But I think they understand what they have, and they're going to continue to, I think, to use those properties to be as successful as they can, until they can get the other stuff together that's not Fox, until they can figure out what's going on with Pixar and Disney Animation and all that other stuff, and some of those other properties. They kind of have to harp on or use some of that fuel of stuff that hasn't been tapped into in a long time, like Alien and Deadpool and Wolverine and mutiny, mutant kind of things like that. So I think it's all an amount of time before they start pulling even more of that stuff out of the bag. Shoot, knowing them, there's more Fox legacy sequels on the way that we just don't know about yet. Unfortunately, I don't necessarily want that completely, but I can see that definitely happening for the future, especially given the success that they've had with the Fox properties that they've been using so far this year. So yeah, we'll see, man.
Yeah, sometimes these things just do take time. I mean, ultimately, films have a incredibly long lead time. They take a while to produce, even when purchasing the company in 2019. I mean, you still have to give yourself probably at least 3 years before anything can really get off the ground from a production
Yeah.
standpoint. And I think certainly they knew that several of these big IPs, they were going to go immediately into production. Planet of the Apes and Aliens, like those have to be at the top of the list when you look at Fox properties. Like, yeah, we need movies for those immediately. And now, after 5 years or so, they have finally been able to see the fruits of their labor, ultimately come back and reap them a lot of rewards so far. And I think ultimately Alien Romulus is going to have some really, really long legs. This month is not going to be great at the movies. I mean, we had a great July, a really, really solid June. Deadpool and
Mm-hmm.
Wolverine, and it ends with us. They carried over a lot of their success into early August for sure. There's definitely legs that'll be carried over from there. But for the next couple of weeks here, it's going to be barren wasteland until Beetlejuice comes out. And so I think Alien
Mm-hmm.
Romulus will do great for the next couple of weeks. And ultimately, yeah, Disney has been responsible, I read, for 42% of the industry's summer box office haul so far. So that's
Sheesh.
huge. That's nearly half
Wow.
of what's been made. This is, I think, going back to what Bob Iger was talking about, just leaning on these legacy sequels, leaning on the well-known IP. We can gripe about it, but it certainly has proven to work in many instances, whether we appreciate it or not. And I think that Alien Romulus is, as a film, even outside of existing as an IP, it's trying to balance that even in the story. You sort of mentioned that too. Like, it is trying to be somewhat its own movie and have its own identity, but we're also very much relying on the legacy of what these films have established for the past 45 years. And
Mm-hmm.
if you've seen those movies, you'll heavily appreciate that stuff. If not, I think you'll still enjoy it, but ultimately, it'll become a more rich experience if you do sort of know the history and the lineage of what the franchise has been through. But we'll certainly have to see how 20th Century Studios and all of their future plans continue to integrate into the bigger picture for the Walt Disney Company. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on the brand new film Alien Romulus. If you've checked this out this past weekend, hit us up and let us know what you think.